At 52, I had become a master of the mundane. My life was a carefully orchestrated symphony of responsibilities: marriage, motherhood, household management, all performed with dutiful precision. I had convinced myself that contentment lived in the space between dreams and reality, that wisdom meant accepting less rather than hoping for more. Passion was a luxury I'd never afforded myself, a concept reserved for the reckless or the young. How naive that seems now. How painfully narrow my understanding of what it meant to truly live. The transformation began on a sweltering Thursday in mid-June, when the heat seemed to press against every surface like an insistent memory. I had just finished tending to my roses when my phone chimed with a text from Sarah, my dearest friend since our university days. Emergency favor needed. Can Marcus stay at your place this weekend? Dad's had a stroke and I need to rush to Jacksonville. I hesitated, squinting through the afternoon glare. Marcus, her son, hovering between 17 and 18, that precarious age where childhood dissolves into something more complex. My mind conjured the image of a gangly 12-year-old who once hid behind his mother's skirt during their visits. But recently, he'd grown into his height. His voice had settled into something deeper, and his presence carried an unexpected gravity. Without hesitation, I agreed. Sarah had been my anchor through countless storms over the years. Providing shelter for her son was a small kindness in comparison. He appeared at my doorstep that evening, a weathered backpack slung over his shoulder, and an almost apologetic smile playing at his lips. "I really appreciate this, Mrs. Harrison," he said, his tone formal but warm. "Nonsense," I replied, dismissing the courtesy with a wave. "You're practically family, and you're certainly old enough now. Just call me Linda." Something flickered in his expression, a brief moment where his smile seemed to linger just a heartbeat longer than convention would dictate. I told myself I was imagining things. We found our groove effortlessly. I prepared lasagna that first night, apparently a long-time favorite, and we settled in to watch some action-packed thriller he'd chosen. While I struggled to follow the convoluted plot, he remained transfixed, leaning forward as though searching for hidden meanings within the chaos. Our conversation that evening remained pleasantly superficial. His academic plans, career uncertainties. He mentioned possibly studying mechanics or joining his cousin in Montana. There was a thoughtful depth to him that caught me off guard. He wasn't the directionless youth I'd anticipated. Later, while delivering fresh linens to his room, I discovered him on the rear porch, gazing into the darkness. Fireflies danced through the tall grass, and the air thrummed with the evening chorus of crickets. "Everything all right?" I asked softly, stepping onto the deck beside him. He nodded but remained silent for several moments. "Sometimes I wish I could pause everything," he said eventually. "Just freeze a moment before it disappears." "Do you ever feel like that?" I studied his profile in the moonlight, the strong line of his jaw, the earnestness in his voice. Something about his words resonated in an unexpected place within me. "More often than I'd care to admit," I answered quietly. He turned toward me, and in that instant, something intangible shifted between us. Not attraction, at least. That's what I insisted to myself, but recognition. A shared understanding of longing, of time's relentless passage. Then he smiled, rose from his chair, and bid me good night. I remained on the porch long after he'd gone inside, trying to decipher the strange warmth that had settled in my chest. It felt like remembrance of youth, of possibility, of being truly observed. The following day unfolded. Leisurely, I prepared French toast while he voluntarily helped reorganize the storage room. We worked to a soundtrack of classic rock, and I was surprised when he sang along to several songs. "Your musical taste exceeds my expectations," I commented playfully. He laughed. Credit my mom, she's been playing your old favorites for years." By evening, we were both perspiring from our efforts, so I suggested cooling off in the pool. I hadn't swum in months, but the idea felt refreshing. I changed into a one-piece that had languished in my dresser, suddenly hyper-aware of how it hugged my middle-aged figure. When I emerged, he was already floating peacefully, eyes closed against the setting sun. He looked so serene, so completely at ease. Something within me softened. "Water's perfect," he said without opening his eyes. The pool was indeed warm from the day's heat. We splashed gently, engaging in meaningless chatter. Then he looked directly at me. "You don't really smile often," he observed. I blinked, caught off guard. "Of course I do." He shook his head slowly. "You smile politely, but when it's genuine, it transforms your entire face." My breath caught. I laughed nervously, but his words lodged themselves somewhere deep inside me. The way he spoke, the way he saw me, not as someone's middle-aged friend, not as a woman whose best years were behind her, but as a human being worthy of notice. That night, sleep eluded me. His voice echoed in my thoughts, along with his laughter, and the way his gaze had held mine just slightly too long. I began to recognize that something long dormant was stirring within me, something that both terrified and exhilarated me in equal measure. I didn't yet understand how profoundly it would alter everything. The next morning arrived earlier than usual for me. Dawn was still climbing over the trees when I settled at the kitchen table with my coffee, staring through the window at the soft light spreading across the yard. I kept telling myself the previous night's emotions were simply fatigue, that these unfamiliar feelings were merely the result of having houseguests disrupting my routine. But when I heard his footsteps descending the stairs, bare feet against hardwood, slow and heavy with sleep, something fluttered in my ribcage. It was absurd. I was 52 years old. He was barely finished with high school. I had no business entertaining such thoughts. Yet when he appeared in the kitchen, hair tousled and eyes still heavy with sleep, I found myself smiling before I could suppress it. "Morning," he mumbled, rubbing his neck. "You're early," I replied. "Hungry for some breakfast?" He nodded, and we settled into an easy rhythmy cooking while he observed from nearby with that particular attention that made me both nervous and curious. There was something peaceful about the moment, the gentle clatter of the spatula against the pan, the way morning light caught the amber in his hair, the comfortable silence between us. When I handed him his plate, our fingers brushed briefly, just enough to send an unexpected jolt through me. I tried to remain composed. "You always seem so centered," he said as we ate. I laughed softly. "Is that your diplomatic way of calling me boring?" "Not at all," he said quickly. "I just mean it's comforting. You make everything feel secure." Such a simple, honest compliment, yet it nearly undid me. I'd spent decades being the reliable one, the one who maintained stability, who smiled through disappointments and tucked away inconvenient emotions so others could remain comfortable. Too. Hear someone say I created safety. It felt like being truly seen for the first time in years. After breakfast, we made no formal plans. He settled on the porch with a book while I attended to household tasks, though my thoughts kept wandering. By late afternoon, the sky had darkened. Thunderclouds rolled in from the horizon, rumbling with distant threats. Florida's summer storms had a way of arriving suddenly and completely. We retreated to the living room as rain began tapping against the windows. I lit several candles in case the power failed, and we found ourselves on the sofa, browsing through a photo album I hadn't opened in ages. "That's my daughter at 6, I said, indicating a picture of a small girl in muddy boots clutching a toad. "She has your eyes," he observed. "She's braver than I ever was," I murmured, more to myself than to him. He turned to study me. "You underestimate yourself." I became acutely aware of our proximity. The sofa seemed to have shrunk. There was warmth radiating between us. Subtle but unmistakable. "You remind me of someone I used to know," I said softly, unsure why I had spoken. "Is that positive?" he asked. I nodded, eyes meeting his. "Yes, though it frightens me." The silence stretched. Thunder rolled closer. He reached out and placed his hand over mine. A simple gesture, fingers resting lightly against my skin. "You don't need to be afraid with me," he said quietly. My breath caught. It would have been simple to withdraw, to change the subject, to stand and busy myself with safe activities like cleaning or calling Sarah. But I didn't. I remained still, allowing the moment to settle between us, letting the warmth of his touch travel up my arm like a gentle invitation. Eventually, I did pull away, not from desire, but from necessity. I stood and retreated to the kitchen under the pretense of making tea. My heart was racing, my thoughts scattered like leaves. I told myself this had to end, that nothing could develop, that it was simply a lonely woman and a compassionate young man misreading signals during an unusual weekend. But I could still feel the impression of his touch. That night, sleep remained elusive. I lay listening to the rain still falling outside, trying to convince myself that nothing had fundamentally changed. But deep within, I knew it had, and I wasn't certain what that meant or what would follow. By morning, the rain had ceased, leaving behind that rich, earthy scent that follows storms. I stood barefoot on the porch with my coffee, watching mist rise from the grass. Everything felt suspended, as though the house itself was holding its breath. Marcus hadn't yet come downstairs, and I wasn't sure whether I felt relieved or disappointed. The memory of his hand covering mine persisted. I'd replayed the moment countless times throughout the night, each time telling myself it meant nothing until it began meaning something I couldn't dismiss. I heard his familiar footsteps. They'd already become part of the house's rhythm. He joined me on the porch, stretching, his t-shirt wrinkled and slightly damp. He looked older than he had days earlier, or perhaps I was simply seeing him differently. "Morning," he said softly. "Hey." We stood quietly for several minutes. Birds had returned after the storm, chattering in the trees as though nothing had occurred. "You all right?" he asked. I hesitated. "I'm not entirely sure." He nodded slowly, as if understanding something I hadn't articulated. "About yesterday, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable," he added after a moment. "You didn't," I said too quickly, then amended. "Not exactly." He waited, watching. I sighed, gripping my mug more tightly. "I think I'd forgotten what it feels like to be truly seen. And I wasn't expecting it from ... Well, from you. I wasn't expecting to feel it either," he said quietly. "What do we do with that?" It would have been easier if he'd dismissed it, if he'd claimed he was simply being kind or blamed it on youthful awkwardness. But he didn't. He stood there, honest and open, and it was that sincerity that affected me most profoundly. We spent the morning engaged in ordinary activities: grocery shopping, organizing closets. But something had shifted between us. There was a tension now, gentle but constant, like an invisible thread drawing us closer with every glance, every accidental contact. That afternoon, we sat in the living room again, this time watching a contemplative foreign film he'd selected. It was slow and beautiful, full of meaningful silences and subtle gestures. Somewhere in the middle, he reached out and covered my hand with his once more. And I didn't retreat. We didn't speak. We simply remained connected, hands touching, The film casting shadows across our faces. I could feel his pulse through his fingers, steady, warm, alive. My own hand trembled slightly, but I didn't withdraw. When the credits rolled, he turned toward me, his eyes searching mine. "Can I say something?" he asked. I nodded. "You're the first person in a long time who's truly heard me, who hasn't treated me like just another clueless teenager." I swallowed hard. "You're not clueless." "I know," he said, "but you're the only one who recognizes that." There was something achingly vulnerable in his voice, something that touched parts of me I hadn't accessed in years. I reached up and brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. An impulse. I didn't register until my fingers were already there. He leaned forward slightly, enough that I felt the warmth of his breath, enough that I had to close my eyes momentarily. But then I stood abruptly. I should start dinner," I said, my voice unsteady. He didn't protest. He simply watched me walk away. In the kitchen, I gripped the counter, heart pounding. This wasn't supposed to be happening. He was leaving tomorrow. Sarah would return. Life would resume its normal, predictable course. Yet something inside me felt permanently altered, like a door had opened that could never be fully closed again. That evening, after dinner, he offered to handle the dishes. I stood beside him, drying as he washed, our movements deliberate and unhurried. When we finished, he faced me. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For this. For being yourself." I didn't know how to respond, so I reached up and touched his cheek just once, just briefly. And in that moment, I understood this wasn't about age or social conventions or even physical attraction. It was about being seen, being valued, being understood in a way I hadn't experienced in decades. It was terrifying and it was beautiful. That night, I abandoned any attempt at sleep. I sat alone in the living room after Marcus had gone upstairs. The lights dimmed, the house humming with the particular stillness that comes in the early morning hours. I curled beneath a throw blanket, staring into space. My thoughts moved like thick honey, too heavy to fight, but impossible to ignore. I kept replaying everything that had occurred over the past few days. The quiet conversations, the lingering looks, the words that seemed to hang in the air long after they were spoken. None of it had been planned, and all of it felt genuine. I'd been living carefully for years. My divorce had been civilized but empty. The children had grown and moved away, and I'd constructed a routine that was secure and structured. I'd even convinced myself it was sufficient. Until now. It was just past 2 a.m. when I heard footsteps on the stairs. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. He paused at the room's entrance. I could sense his presence, gentle, uncertain. "Couldn't sleep," he said quietly. Neither could I. He sat beside me, careful to maintain some distance. His voice was low. "I'm leaving tomorrow." "I know." There was a long pause. "I don't want this to be something we pretend never happened," he said finally. I turned to him. "We haven't done anything." "We have," he said, meeting my eyes. "Even without touching, you feel it too, don't you?" I looked away, but that didn't make him wrong. "I do," I whispered. "But that doesn't mean we should act on it. I'm not asking for promises," he said. I don't want to feel like I was alone in this." "You weren't." Silence again. Outside, wind stirred the trees. A branch tapped gently against the window, like a reminder that time continued moving. He extended his hand, and this time I didn't hesitate. I let his fingers find mine, though it wasn't about romance. It wasn't about crossing forbidden lines. It was about connection, about being human, about two people who, for different reasons, felt isolated and happened to find solace in each other's presence. We sat like that for a while. No words, no expectations. Just existence. Eventually I rested my head against his shoulder. I didn't know what it signified. I didn't know what came next, but I knew I would carry that feeling for a very long time. The following morning, the air was crisp and bright. We said farewell without theatrics. He embraced me tightly, longer than necessary, and I held on equally long. "Thank you," he said again. "For what?" "For seeing me." As I watched him walk down the driveway toward his mother's waiting car, I felt an odd mixture of sadness and tranquility. Sarah waved from the driver's seat, completely unaware of what had transpired between us. And that was as it should be. I returned inside, the house suddenly quieter than before. Later that afternoon, I found myself on the back deck with tea, the sun warming my face. I let the silence embrace me. Perhaps nothing would develop from it. Perhaps it was simply a moment, a weekend, a gentle spark in an otherwise quiet period of my life. But perhaps it was something more significant than that. I had spent years believing that love only appeared in one form, that beyond a certain age, your heart stopped offering surprises. Now I understood better. We don't always choose when we awaken or who awakens us. And sometimes the most unexpected moments are the ones that remind us we're still alive, still capable of feeling, still deserving of being truly seen.